going to tell you about how we can use a combination of machine learning and novel wireless technology to assess a variety of diseases. When you have a disease, when you are working with patients as a doctor or you are a pharmaceutical company trying to run clinical trials, there are a variety of things that you need to assess about the disease and the patient. I mean, the first thing, of course, you need to diagnose something. You need to diagnose that somebody has a particular disease. Now, for certain diseases, that on its own is really hard. So think about a disease like Parkinson's. So today, we diagnose Parkinson's based on clinical measures that are related to motion. Like you all know tremor, for example, and rigidity that we see in Parkinson's patients. But Parkinson actually starts many years before these clinical measures. So naturally, you can ask, can we actually use this new technology to detect diseases and diagnose diseases and potentially help us diagnose them earlier than otherwise? The second thing that you need to assess about the disease, so if you are a doctor and you are treating a patient, you are giving them some medications and you are asking them to do certain things, and you want to assess the impact on the response to medications on those patients. And how can you do that? So today, also in a variety of diseases, this is very hard, whether you are talking about Parkinson, you are talking about atopic dermatitis, we don't have a very sensitive way so that small changes can be tracked. And also, if you are running a large clinical trial, let's say, and you want to assess whether you make a difference with your drug, you want not just to be able to measure something, you want to measure it in a sensitive way so that you don't have to wait for a long time so that the impact is much bigger so that it is measurable. And you want to remove the variance so that you can have a smaller sample. So all of that is about assessing diseases. Now, in the rest of this talk, I'm going to tell you, as I said, about a new way for assessing diseases, and I'm going to give you examples from Parkinson's, atopic dermatitis, and also a bit about COVID. So some of you may have heard parts of this talk, so I'm going to try to go over the basics, but jump also to the disease part and the assessment after that. Okay, so let me try to close this. Okay, so the way we are going to assess diseases is with a box that's called a Wi-Fi box. You all have them. You have a Wi-Fi box. So now imagine if that Wi-Fi box that sits in the home of the patient, in this case, is much smarter. It can actually analyze the electromagnetic waves around it and in the environment. And from that, it can get the person breathing, heartbeats. When they feel itchy as a scratch, it can detect that scratching. If they move, it can track their movements. If they are fatigued and they are not moving, it can detect that their gait has changed, their movement pattern has changed. And can even detect the interaction between the patient and their caregiver. So that might sound weird, like how can we do this? But actually we can do all of that and more. And we have in my group at MIT here, designed what looks very much like a Wi-Fi box. It sits in the background of the home, and we call it Emerald. And sorry, we call it the Emerald wireless box. And what it does, it uses the electromagnetic waves that we all put in and analyze them using machine learning, custom machine learning algorithm to detect sleep, breathing, heartbeats, gait, scratching, and more. Now, I'm going to start by just showing you a few videos to understand what's happening here. And then we'll talk more about how this works and the diseases themselves. So wireless signals spread in the environment, they reflect off our bodies because our bodies are full of water. And some of these reflections will come back to our device, which analyzes them using machine learning. In this case, can detect that this is a fall and alert the caregiver via text, email, or a phone call. Now, I want to show you actual experiments with real people. This is actually one of our earlier experiments. This is like from 4 years ago or more. So our device, this is, of course, all of you guys in the room recognize this is C-cell, and the device is not even in the same office as the student. The device is in the adjacent office, and we're going to monitor this person through the wall because we all know that wireless signals can traverse walls, and we're going to track his motion. So look at the red dot and how it's tracking his motion accurately. And remember, we are tracking him because his body changes the electromagnetic waves around him without asking him to wear any wearables or sensors on his body. So completely passively. So with that, we can take this motion and compare it to actual ground truth from a vital motion capture system, and the accuracy is 98%. And as you can see, it's quite accurate, and we can do it completely passively. I mean, he doesn't need to know anything or do anything for that to happen. Now we can monitor other things with this method. So one thing that we can monitor is sleep. So not only we can tell when the person gets to bed and when they step out of bed, that would be a measure of motion called actigraphy. But actually we can measure or estimate more accurately the brainwave state of the sleep, what's called sleep stages. So when you go to sleep, your brainwaves change and you enter different stages that are called awake, light sleep, deep sleep, and rapid eye movements, REM. For example, REM is the stage in which you dream typically. Deep sleep is the stage in which typically you do a consolidation of memory. And these stages are very important for sleep disorders, but they are also important for a variety of diseases. So for example, in depression, one of the things that tend to happen is that REM stage can happen early on in the sleep, much earlier than otherwise. And deep sleep and the slow waves during deep sleep are associated or in the literature have been shown to be correlated with Alzheimer's. So now if you want to get these sleep stages, you send your patient to a sleep lab. They put all of these wires and electrodes on his head and body, and they ask him to sleep like this. Now you can tell that he's not happy about this experiment. But you can think about it, like if you actually want to measure sleep like this, you are not going to get measurement every night. And also, it might not be representative. The person may not be able to sleep, not because they have sleep problems, but actually because they are perturbed with all these electrodes on their body. Let me show you what we can do. So here's our device. We transmit very low power wireless signal, analyze the reflection using machine learning mechanism, and spit out the sleep stages throughout the night. He sleeps in his own bedroom without any electrode on his head or body. And we can do this every single night. And we did multiple experiments and studies. Actually, the first one was with MGH, and we showed that the accuracy is 80%, which is actually comparable to what you get in a sleep lab. Because when you go to a sleep lab, and that EEG signal that I told you about is given to a sleep technician, and the sleep technician goes for every 30 seconds, he says, okay, light sleep, deep sleep, REM. But then if you take that same signal and give it to another sleep technician, they're going to have some disagreement. So the consistency on the same data from the same person, the same night between two sleep technicians is on average 83%. So pretty close to what we can get automatically in the person's home without any electrodes. So this person is sitting like you guys, and what you see on the screen is his inhales and exhales. So we can get his respiration, his breathing signal without attaching any electrodes or wearables to him. We ask him to hold his breath. You can see the signal stays at a steady level because he exhaled, he did not inhale. And of course, again, we compare with the ground truth. In this case, it is an FDA-approved chest belt for measuring breathing, and it is highly accurate. Now, if you zoom in on this breathing signal, what do you see here? You see the inhales, you see the exhales, but you see these small blips on the signal. So these are actually not noise. This is his heartbeat. So imagine these electromagnetic waves, you guys are sitting here, you are surrounded with humongous number of different wireless signals. And every single move, including the pulsing of your blood, leaves a signature on those electromagnetic waves. And what we are doing is to take those electromagnetic waves and do the inverse transform using machine learning and signal processing to be able to say, okay, so this is your breathing, this is your heart. So I want to tell you a bit more how it works. And I'm going to talk about it at a high level. And I'm sorry, like the audience is very diverse. So this is going to be not technical enough for the very technical people, but a bit technical for the people who are outside computer science. But we'll try to hopefully not lose anyone. So how does it work? When you transmit a wireless signal, it actually traverses walls and occlusions, and it reflects off the human body because our bodies are full of water. And some of these minute reflections will come back to your device. And now you want to analyze those minute reflections, and from that gets information about this person. So now, if you think about it, we all know that distance is equivalent to the time it takes the signal to travel, the reflection time, multiplied by the speed of light, because this is the speed of electromagnetic wave, is the same speed as the speed of light. So if you know the speed of light, actually we all do, then you can compute the distance by computing the reflection time. Okay, this is very simple. I mean, just general knowledge. Basically, distance equal to speed multiplied by time. So if you know that, this very simple equation, you can compute the reflection time, hopefully. And if you know the reflection time, then you can get that dot that is moving on the ground because you can get distance. So this principle actually is underlying radar and sonar and variety of different mechanisms and technologies. Unfortunately, life is not that simple. So you cannot just simply take radar and apply it here and things will work. Because what's going to happen is that it is much more difficult to compute this reflection time when you are working in indoor scenario because there are so many things that reflect, not just the human body. So think about it this way. So in radar, you're transmitting a signal to the sky. It's mostly empty. It reflects off an airplane, comes back to you, you can track that airplane easily. But in an environment like this, the signal actually reflects off everything. Me, you, the podium, the walls, the floor, the ceiling, everything. So that leads to what we call, actually, let me skip this one. Yeah, that leads to what we call multipath reflections. So, and the hardest among them is these secondary reflections. The signal might reflect off me and then reflect off the podium, and then go reflects off you. So it's just a confusion of all of these reflections. So when you actually try to find the reflection time, you are going to get not just one reflection, you are going to get power from many different reflections, and the person is just going to be in the noise. So the question becomes, how do we extract the human from all of this mess of reflections? And how do we get physiological signals? Again, remember, it's not just that we want a dot. I mean, it would be good to get the dot on the floor, but we want more than that. We want sleep stages, we want physiological signals, we want a variety of things, yeah. So how do we do that? So the answer is that we leverage custom designed neural networks that operate over electromagnetic waves. Now, many of you in the audience, of course, are knowledgeable about neural networks and how much they change areas such as computer vision, NLP, speech, all of those things. So you are very familiar with neural networks when they operate on images, text, or audio. Here, what we are doing is to change these neural networks to operate on electromagnetic waves. Now, there are a variety of things that happen when you do that. but I'm going to go over some at a very high level, some of the changes. So one of the things that happens is that you train a neural network, and of course you want to train a neural networks with some people. Let's take sleep as one example. You want to train neural network with sleep information that you might take from me, from Regina, from David, Barbara, etc. And then you want to take that device and go to a new home, and it should work. It shouldn't that, again, you ask the person to go to a sleep lab and you get your signal and you train again. How is it going to work? So let's say that you trained your system with Barbara and David, and you want to apply it to Chris. Now, Barbara and David will be considered what we call source domains, and Chris is the target domain. The problem is that radio signal depends on the environment. So if you trained in Barbara's home and in David's home, it's not going to easily be taken to a new environment, which is now Chris's home, and be working properly, right? So we need to remove this information that is environment dependent. We need to remove extraneous information irrelevant to the task and leave only the information that is relevant to the task. In this case, let's say sleep characterization or sleep staging. So here's one possible solution. Now, actually, the system and how you remove extraneous information has so many different levels of complexity, but let me just talk about some ideas in this domain. So one thing that we do in machine learning is something called adversarial domain adaptation. So let's say that you have an input signal, in this case is RF. So you have a neural network. First, the neural network tries to extract a representation of that signal. So we call that an encoder. And then you have another neural network that takes that representation and predict some metric of interest. Let's call it the predictor. And in this case, our metric of interest is something related to health. So maybe whether the person is awake or asleep, whether they are in REM or light sleep, etc. Now, we want this representation to be related to the task of interest, has information about the health metric, but not have extraneous information about the environment, like the home where the network was trained. So how are we going to do that? One approach is to add a third network, it's called the discriminator. And in this case, we train the discriminator to actually predict the home, predict the environment in which the training happened. And then we can design a loss function. So this is what is traditionally called adversarial domain adaptation. You design your loss function such that as you train over the training process, the loss of the predictor is decreased and the loss of the discriminator increases. So eventually, the guy who's supposed to know whether this is the home of Barbara or the home of Dina is going to lose. It's going to be unable after training to tell whose home that was. And as a result, the information related to the home will be removed. Now, let me ask you, does that work well? Do you think, some of the people in the audience are machine learning students. What is the risk? But independent whether you do machine learning or not, what is the risk here? So the risk is that you are going to remove information that is related to the actual task of interest. Maybe some of the information that separate environment 1 and environment 2 is related to actually the person. Like let's say that the person, some people might have obesity and it might affect their sleep. So if you want really to make things across domain like the same, like remove all extraneous information that are domain related, then you might remove that information and as a result, your prediction is bad. So here's one way to deal with this is to move from traditional discriminator to a conditional discriminator. So when you train, you can give the discriminator actually the health information that you are interested in. So that the discriminator, this network that eventually you are going to train to fool, you cannot fool it by removing the health information because the discriminator, the network D already has that information as input. And you can prove that in equilibrium, such a system will converge to eliminate only extraneous information and remove and leave all information that is relevant to the task. So given the time, I don't have more time to tell you more about the other machine learning systems here, but I'm going to just list a few other ML challenges for people who come from ML background. So one of the things is, how do you label wireless signals? Like if I give you a wireless signal, if I give you an image and tell you, okay, tell me the dog in this image or the head of the cat in this image, that's easy. We all know how to do that. Right? But if I give you a wireless signal and tell you, like, tell me the head of the person here, or tell me whether this person is in light sleep or deep sleep, how do you do it? You have no way of doing it. So traditional annotation, by just like taking that data and giving it to people who can like manually annotate it the same way as we do with images or text, this is not applicable. So you have, for every task that you are trying to learn or train, you have to find a new way for figuring out how to label and annotate your data. That gets you to a second question. Can we actually learn with data that is not labeled, completely unsupervised? Right? So we know in machine learning, in NLP, in computer vision, we can use something called contrastive learning to learn from unsupervised data. But if you think about it, it doesn't really apply to electromagnetic signals, because contrastive learning, take contrastive learning in images, for example, you have to design what is called data augmentation. Like you have to like use jittering of colors, because you know color can be problematic if you like, you can learn distribution of color, or you have to crop the image but leave the object as a central object in the image there. But how can you change electromagnetic signal while you guarantee that the property that you are interested in has not changed? You don't know how to do that. So you have to advise, and you have to think about new ways of running or expanding contrastive learning to these environments. Another thing is, I mean, I talked about domain adaptation, but really it's much, much more complex, because actually the whole distribution might be completely different from one person to another person. It's not just simple domain shifts. The third thing is, I just told you about a single individual. But what actually, if you take a wireless signal, and it's not that just one person is sleeping in the bed, there is a couple that is sleeping in the bed. How do you separate the sleep of this person from the sleep of that person? Okay, so all of this and more you have to think about, and we have started touching on all of these subjects and developing machine learning that works in this environment. But let me show you more results. So here you see this person. I showed you that we can track him with that dot. And you see the red dot, and you know, like he's in the center of that room. But the dot doesn't tell you whether he's standing or sitting. And when he moves, you see the dot sliding, but you cannot tell whether he's moving with his right foot or left foot. So I told you this was an earlier result. So let me fast forward to some of our more recent results and show it to you. So this is a more recent system that we have developed. And what you can see here, the big frame is actually what the radio signal is able to capture. So the radio signal can get these skeletons, and it can get them through a wall. The image at the top is just so that you guys understand what is going on in the scene. So let me play this for you. So you see, as he sits on the chair, you see the skeleton sitting on the chair. When he stands up, the skeleton stands up. When he moves with his right foot, the skeleton moves with the right foot. When he moves with the left foot, you see the same. And actually, all of this data is through walls as well. And some of these environments we recognize here in C-cell. So let me show you more. This is more people. And you can still see the behavior of the skeletons and how they are moving. This is more to highlight different properties. So as the person goes behind the wall, you of course visually you lose them, but you still know what they are doing and how they are moving. And here in darkness, of course, cameras stop working, but our signal doesn't really care whether it's dark or not. So still it works perfectly fine. And also you can see interactions between people. Like here, one of the students is trying to explain something, writing something on the board, and the other person is talking to him and interacting with him. So over the last 2 years, we have been working with doctors, pharmaceutical companies, and many stakeholders in healthcare on a variety of diseases, including Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, rare diseases such as FSHD, autoimmune diseases such as Crohn's, and also atopic dermatitis. And I'm going to tell you now about some of the results with actual patients in their homes. So first, let me show you the device. This is our device. As you can see, it's like sits on the wall like a picture frame, non-obtrusively. The person doesn't even have to do anything, just forget about it and live their lives. So the first set of results are in collaboration with Dr. Ray Dorsey at the University of Rochester Medical School and also the NIH Udall Center. And I'm going just to touch briefly on these results. And also there are other collaborators on this Parkinson's studies, including Mayo Clinic and MGH. First, I just want to show you an illustrative result here. So what you see here is a deployment of our device with one of the Parkinson patients. So this green box here at the top is the Emerald device. And this patient happens to live in an assisted living community, so this is his unit. And this blue curve that you see is 2 hours of trajectory of his movements. So what you see is that he's moving between the bed, the chair, enter the bathroom. This area is a kitchen area. So we take all of these trajectories and try to understand his life. So here, this graph is for the patient from the previous graph. Every circle here is 1 day. The innermost circle is the first day of the study. The outermost circle is the last day of the study. 0 at the top is midnight. 12 at the bottom is noontime. So first, look at this blue area. So this is actually when he's asleep in bed. And as you can see, at the beginning of the study here near the center of the graph, the blue is very fragmented, so his sleep is very bad. As we continue with the study, get to the outer circle, you see the blue starting to consolidate. So his sleep has improved dramatically. Now, the other thing that you see here is green all over the place. So green is when he sits on this chair. So he really likes sitting on this chair. So this is a person who wakes up, sits on a chair, and this is hardly the whole thing that he does. I mean, basically, there is hardly anything else. So this is a very sedentary life that makes a doctor really worry about this patient. Another thing that you can see, you see this cone is yellow around 8 a.m. in the morning. So yellow refers to the time when he goes to bathroom for his toileting and showering and toileting. So let me ask you this question. So somebody who wakes up around almost 4 a.m. in the morning, as you can see from the blue area, he sits on a chair, this green, until exactly 8 a.m. to do his showering and toileting at 8 a.m. Why would anyone do that? I mean, the vast majority of us will wake up, just go do toileting and showering. Why would you sit on a chair for hours until 8 a.m. and then you go to take your shower? Any guess? Yes?
He has a caregiver.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So actually, coming from like being a computer scientist, me and my student at the beginning we were really surprised. But then the doctor immediately said, "Wow, this person cannot actually do his showering on his own. He sits on a chair. He's waiting for the caregiver to come around 8 a.m. and take him to do his showering and toileting." So that is very important because it tells you also the impact of the disease on what we call daily activities. So all of this actually opens something completely new about how you understand your patients, because it gives you a window to the home of the patient and both their behavior and their physiological signal. But it's really important when you are dealing with diseases also to map back your measurements to the gold standard in the field. Okay, so in Parkinson's, what people use to assess Parkinson is something called UPDRS. So let's see how our metric relates to UPDRS. So here what I'm going to show you is on one axis is the gait speed that we measure. On the other axis is UPDRS, which is this gold standard for Parkinson. Now, if you don't know, haven't heard before about UPDRS, don't worry about it. The only thing that you need to know is that it is a very long questionnaire that is semi-subjective that the doctor or the clinician computes for a patient by asking him questions, asking him to move in a particular way, and they get some score. And that score, the larger the score, the worse the Parkinson is. And this is a specific part. UPDRS has multiple parts. So this part 3, refers to their motion. Like, you know, in Parkinson, there are tremors and ability to move and all of that stuff. So this is called UPDRS part 3. So you can see that the gait speed that we measure, actually each dot here is one patient in our study. And as you can see, there is very high correlation between the gait speed that we measure in the home and the UPDRS. Okay. And then we also did look at not just the motor function, but UPDRS, as I said, it has multiple sections. Some of them have to do with sleep, some of them have to do with daily activities and so on. And then you sum all of them, and this would be the sum, which is UPDRS all part, and that's the gold standard, the final gold standard. And you can see actually still very high correlation, and p-value is small, saying that there is statistical significance, that these results are statistically meaningful. So not only we give a new window to the patient's life, but also we can map this back to actual things that people do now, the gold standard in that disease. Another thing that is really interesting is response to medications. So on the x-axis, you see the time in the day, and on the y-axis, you see the gait speed of the patient at home. And now let me show you how his gait speed changes as a function of the hour in the day. Now, these results are, we take about 2 months of data and we create what's called box plot. And here you see like the red color is the median in each one of these box plots. So just look at the red curve, and the red curve is his gait speed, like the speed at which he's walking as a function of the hour. Now, this should be surprising to some of you at least. Like, why someone, I mean, we all probably are slower at night. So he is slow at night between 4 a.m. to 7 a.m. But then somehow his speed increases dramatically, almost double. And then it stays high, but then at some point it goes down. And then again it goes high, and then again down, and again high. Like, there are these peaks and valleys. So guess what? You put actually the drugs on this graph, and here's what you get. This is the first medication dose. So he wakes up, he takes his medication, suddenly he can move much, much faster. Then the effect of medication starts wearing off, so the speed goes down. And now you get the second dose of medication, and again, the speed goes up again. And now, then again, the same thing, the medication wears off. So he takes the third dose and the fourth dose. Every peak is associated with 1 dose of his medication. So if the doctor, for example, is to remove this dose, this peak will disappear. And actually, we see that in our data when the medication changed. The final thing that I want to show you is a result that is very recent. Can we detect Parkinson's disease from something that has nothing to do with motion? Someone's breathing. Like imagine if somebody tells you, we can just look at your breathing signal, and from that, I can tell whether you have Parkinson's or not. So we discovered that we can actually design a neural network model that would take someone's breathing and tell you whether they have Parkinson's disease. So this is the setup. This is our device. It sits on the wall. Again, remember that our device can extract breathing. And without even touching the person, we just take the wireless signal. From the wireless signal, we get breathing, and then we pass it to a neural network. And here is the AUC. As you can see, the accuracy is, or the AUC is 90%. So with 90%, I can tell AUC, I can tell whether someone has Parkinson's or not from measuring their breathing without even touching their body. Now, another thing that is really interesting, because we are using breathing to detect whether someone has Parkinson's, can we potentially detect that before they start being diagnosed? Because before the motion and the tremor starts appearing on them. Maybe the breathing changes earlier. So some of the patients in our study, we have data, we have breathing data for them 5 years before their reported Parkinson diagnosis. Okay, so let me show you when we compare that. So here, the patients who are in blue, and the red ones are control, people who never developed Parkinson. But at this time, even the blue guys, they didn't know that they have Parkinson's. But look at the model. The model PD means Parkinson, non-PD means no Parkinson. The model is already saying, you guys, you have signs that look like Parkinson's to me. So let me see. I have 12 minutes. So let me quickly go over another disease. So this is chronic itch, or I can think about atopic dermatitis. So for many of us, when we think about itch, we don't think that this is really like something that is very serious. But actually for someone who has a chronic itch, who scratches all the time and cannot sleep at night, and this is a chronic disease for them, is very, very different. It's actually a very bad disease. And today, to be able to assess, like if you compare someone who has itch with another person who has itch, and you want to say, like how bad is each one of them, all that you have is that you give them a basically a piece of paper, and on that piece of paper they have to assess, like score, self-score themselves, say my itch is somewhere between 0 to 10, and like tonight my itch is 7, and tomorrow maybe like I feel that my itch is 8, on the day after maybe I feel I'm better, so now I go back to 7. This is how the assessment happens today. This is called NRS. And it's, as you can see, it's very subjective, because how do you compare my 7 with Regina's 7, for example? And just, maybe they're very different. When I say 7, maybe in reality, actually, I am like less severe than her 6 or her 5. And even within a person, it's really hard to keep objectivity. So one of the things is to try to measure it using scratching, using nocturnal scratching. So one way to do that is you can put a camera in someone's bedroom, and you can keep monitoring them with a camera, and then ask people to look at their sleep and when they scratch and annotate that data. So you get a measurement that is based on computer vision of them. But I mean, very few people would be happy to have a camera looking at them and people looking at their images and trying to annotate for them whether they have scratching or not. So what if we can do it with wireless signals? Okay, again, this is a study with Dr. Brian Kim, Washington University Medical School. So actually, let me move quickly here. So here what you see on the x-axis, the human annotation of the videos and for each night. And on the y-axis is our radio signal-based neural network that estimate whether somebody has scratching or not. And as you can see, basically there is like every night, like each blue dot is one night, and the correlation is very high, and you can compute the AUC, and the AUC also is very high. I want to end with talking a bit about COVID, because this is something that we all connect with. Even people who did not have COVID, we all had the experience of going through COVID, and at least we know someone who got COVID. And when COVID particularly hit early on, some of the older people in the Massachusetts area and across the globe got most affected. Because when you have somebody who's an elderly, their health is already compromised, and they get COVID, and it's very dangerous. But the problem is that when somebody gets COVID, you ask them to quarantine and not see anyone. And then you ask them, if your symptom gets worse, then contact the medical expert, right? But how does the patient in many cases, they might be like hallucinating. It's like, how do you assess that? And nobody sees them because they are in quarantine. So one of the assisted living here in the Boston area came to us and said, we want you to help us with our patients. They are in quarantine, but we want to assess the recovery process. And this is a work that we did with Dr. Ipset Vahia from Harvard. So let me show you some of the high-level results. So when you look at the breathing of the patient, of course, the breathing is very important because COVID affects the respiratory system. And here what you see, the breathing of this patient on April 7 the breathing rate was high, 23 breaths per minute. And just 4 days later, it went down to 18, on April 11, it went down to 18 breaths per minute. So that breathing that was high rate got back pretty close actually to the baseline of this particular patient. Now, another thing that happens when recovery is good is that the patients start having more agility and less fatigue. So this is the patient. You can see the green is the patient. This is the green dot, rectangle here is our device. The green dot is the patient. You can see on April 8, April 11. In both cases, the patient is moving from the chair to the bathroom. But you can see how much more agile and faster the patient is moving because she's less fatigued, she's more balanced and able to move much faster and more capable. Now, of course, not all recoveries go smoothly. So one of the things is that monitoring the breathing, at least in our population, was very informative about how the recovery is going. So let me show you this graph. So this is a patient who actually ended up being re-hospitalized. So each one of these blue curves is a histogram of the breathing rate of that patient on a particular day. So the first day, for example, is April 8th. So what you can see here at the beginning, the tip of the histogram, the breathing rate is decreasing. So it's moving from 20 breaths per minute closer to 15 breaths per minute. Then suddenly on April 14, the breathing rate just jumps. And the patient actually ends up in the hospital for breathing problems. So if you look at the dates, this is happening on April 14, and the patient stayed in the hospital for a whole week. And then when she came back, you can see that the breathing rate again is decreasing, and eventually the breathing rate goes back to baseline and the patient recovers. So in our population, we saw three types of patients. Patients whose recovery was not great and it went through some hiccups, like this one who ended up being hospitalized. Patients who were symptomatic, but their breathing and their recovery went smoothly and eventually they recovered. And patients who were asymptomatic. I mean, there is nothing. I mean, the patient is positive, but really physiologically, she's fine. So you can see their breathing is the same before, like when they are COVID positive and when they are COVID negative, nothing has changed. And with this, got to the end of my talk, and what I showed you is a new way to give a doctor or a health professional a window into the health of their patients that is continuous, that enables more accurate, more sensitive, and more objective assessment of a variety of difficult diseases. Thank you.
Thank you, Dina. I see why Dina is an inspiration for all of us. And I should say that Dina can be told really focus about the implication of the technology, and I would get to our technical students in particular to go and look, the depths of work, of mathematical work, the technical work went into these papers and Dina didn't publish. It's really transformative what she did when this whole technology was not there when she started it how many years ago? 6 years ago?
Something like that,
Something
yeah.
like that. So I really wish to every PhD student here to make similar type of transformation. It's really shows to us where your creativity and dreams can bring you. But at any rate, any questions? Yes. Go ahead, Matt.
Is this technology being considered for patient visits by video link and monitoring certain parameters using the?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. So we decided to start actually with helping pharmaceutical company with clinical trials. So not what is called like clinical practice. What you are saying is like, if I have that in like, if I'm a doctor and I have that with my patient, then I can have a call, like a video call to say, hi, blah, blah, blah. But then I also have all the data that correspond to that patient for the whole time. So that would be the next step for us, because that actually requires a whole infrastructure. We need to work with doctors. I mean, basically, if the doctor doesn't see the data, it's not going to make any impact. But we did that actually in the COVID study. In the COVID study with Dr. Fahia, we were every day looking at the data with him and with the assisted living community, because the patient had COVID and they were like, it was a serious situation that needed immediate action if there is any escalation.
I was thinking specifically, this measuring of the breathing is a very important parameter. And I know since I have asthma, every time I get a cold, I get congested and I have trouble breathing, but I don't know like how severe it necessarily is. And since now with COVID, you can't get into the doctor's office, if there's a way of speaking to them. I don't know how specific the breathing is measured, but if the doctor can tell whether it's really bad or it's just mild.
Well, so I think that would be very natural application. And I can tell you even more than that. In fact, breathing is very underused metric. What we see is that breathing gets impacted not by just the standard thing, what you're saying about asthma or basically apnea or all of that stuff. Breathing gets impacted by a variety of drugs. Like we were seeing the breathing, like because some of those patients had also mood disorders and anxiety and stuff like that. So when they take their drug, it affects the breathing signal, because the control of breathing course comes from the medulla and the pons, which get impacted by how drugs affect the brain. And this is again why we can from breathing get Parkinson's, which is really not a breathing disease.
So when you're treating the reflected environment and picking the patient up, do you actually train programs on the inheritable background and then on the more veritable individual signal?
Yeah, so we don't have to train on that particular individual. So that's one of the things that we actually pay a lot of attention, and much of the complexity of the machine learning that I didn't get a chance to talk about is related to that. How to eliminate all information that is not relevant to the task and get only the information that is about the person. And that we do, and we don't have to go like, if I take it to like these Parkinson patients, of course, I'm not gonna sit down and train with them. It's not possible.
But how long does that take you? In an environment, do you have to train for hours or do you just?
No, actually, we don't train at all. We don't need any training in a new environment. All the training is done offline in different environments. So once you train the neural network, you can take it to a new environment and deploy the device, just like connecting a Wi-Fi box.
Yes. Fascinating work. I have this question about what you showed. So if the person is walking in a circle and you can detect what predict gestures based on the EF waves. So this reminds me of the word a. So the context is kind of line of sight. Long line of sight. So you don't have to access much and you're detecting. So
Oh, I see. Okay, so yeah, and actually this is also related to things like seeing around corners, for example. Yeah. So there are many of these similarities. The problem happens when you have a lot of clutter, because the complexity of the problem and where machine learning is helpful. So traditionally, we do all of these things in radar, in like optics, basically, ray tracing, for example, with optics and all of that stuff. But the problem is that when you have an environment that you don't know, because you can't train on the new environment, and also you have what we call low degree of freedom that does not allow you have so many variables that you have only few antennas, as opposed to imaging where you have like I don't know how many megapixels now, but here you have just like a handful of antennas, so you don't have enough degrees of freedom to do the inverse transform without neural networks.
Nice work again. So for the preclinical data for the Parkinson's disease, you showed that like 5 years ago you had, but that was collected probably using another device. Or...
So that was because we separated the representation from the wireless. As I said, we are using breathing as an intermediate representation. So now I can use any breathing signal. I don't have to use, wireless is convenient because I can do it in the home, but I can use breathing signal like breathing signal from sleep labs, for example.
Thank you very much, Dina.